This story was submitted by Miranda. It was about 3 years ago when my parents had gotten a divorce and my sister and I had decided to stay with our mom. We ended up selling our house and renting an even bigger one after my mom had gotten a good deal on it. The house seemed perfect. We all got our own rooms and even had a few extra bedrooms for our guests. My sister and I chose the 2 bedrooms right next to each other and got settled in right away. It was about after a month or so when my sister began to claim she heard strange noises coming from the walls in her room and in her closet. The door to our attic was in her closet wall, and for some reason, it made her uncomfortable. I remember thinking that it was just her being dramatic, or even paranoid from all of the scary movies we would watch. So I just shrugged it off, telling her that it was probably just a mouse or something trapped in one of the walls, considering we lived by a creek where there was a ton of wildlife. As the year went on, she would still claim, every once in a while, to have heard noises at night. Eventually, I think she kinda just gave up trying to convince us, after my mom and I teased her about it. Fast forward to later that year. I had been watching movies at a friend's house when I began to get tired around 1 a.m. and decided to head home. My house's driveway is behind our house, instead of in the front, and it's the last one on our block. As I was about to pull into the back alley that connected to our driveway, I saw my sister searching for her keys to get into the back door of our house. I made her jump by giving her a small honk, and then waved at her as she gave me the finger. As she was fumbling with her keys, I pulled up into our driveway. As I was parking, I noticed that the upstairs lights were on, which is odd, considering my mom is an energy-conserving freak, and she was the last one to leave the house. I shrugged it off as I turned off my headlights and took my keys out of the ignition. As I peered back up at the 2 large windows looking into our upstairs living room above the garage, my heart sank. Standing in one of the windows was a pale, thin woman with gray matted hair, and she was staring right at me, smiling. God, that smile is something I will never forget. It seemed far too wide for her face, and even though I was looking up through the small window from the driveway, I could tell that she was missing teeth. Her overall facial expression just seemed sinister. I didn't know what to do, nor did I fully understand what was going on. I didn't quite register what was happening when I looked up across our back patio at my sister as she managed to unlock the door and began opening it. I snapped my gaze back to the window, where the woman quickly jerked her head away from me and in the direction of the stairs that led straight to the back door. I quickly stumbled from my car and ran for the door, all while screaming my sister's name. The moment I reached the door, I flung it open and immediately grabbed her arm, pulling her for dear life. This seemed to piss her off, and she didn't budge. She snapped at me, telling me to calm down, and asked me what was going on. I lowered my voice, looking around, and nodding towards the upstairs living, I explained that I pulled up to the house and saw the lights upstairs were on, and someone was standing in the window. She rolled her eyes, dismissing it as me messing with her, like I always do. When I told her I wasn't kidding, she gestured up the stairs, and then she pointed out that all of the lights in the house were turned off. Something inside me snapped, and I panicked. I grabbed a fistful of her hair and dragged her outside as quick as I could. I wasn't quite sure whether or not she fully believed me, but I didn't care. She could tell at the very least that I was scared shitless, which was enough for her to begin comforting me. We stood in the backyard, and while I cried hysterically, I demanded that we call the police. After she dialed 911 and was assured that they would send someone out here, I then called my mom, who raced home, arriving shortly after the police. 2 officers searched the house, as my mom waited outside with my sister and me, comforting us. I was still worked up and crying, while my sister was quiet. She was probably determining whether or not to believe what I had claimed to see. When the officers came out, they informed my mother that they hadn't seen anyone in the house, and that there was no signs of forced entry. This information struck fear into my heart. I knew what I saw. One of the officers stayed with me and my sister as I gave a description of the woman I saw. The other officer pulled my mom aside, talking to her in a hushed voice. After they had left, my mom informed me what the police officer had said. He had pointed out that it was late and that it was possible that I had just been tired and imagined that I had saw somebody in the window when I actually hadn't. I didn't fall asleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking about what the officer said. Even if I were imagining somebody standing there, wouldn't the woman have been gone by the time I looked back up at her the second time? Isn't that how it works in the movies? But she had been there, the whole time, just staring at me. I remember it vividly. That smile will forever be etched into my brain. I woke up alone that morning, as I didn't have class that day, and my sister and mom were both at work. I felt a bit uneasy being home alone, so I texted my sister complaining to her that I hadn't slept at all. She then responded with, "Me neither. I kept hearing the scratches from my wall last night." My heart sank once more, as I remembered the door in my sister's closet leading to the attic. Had the officers searched there? Had they thought to move her close to the side in the closet in order to see the door? My first instinct was to call someone, the police, but I remember how stupid they all made me feel last night. I decided to check it out myself, just to give myself a peace of mind. Plus, the attic was small, so it would only take a second to look through the door before slamming it shut and hopefully putting the whole thing behind me. I walked into my sister's room and turned on the flashlight on my phone as I slowly approached the closet. I creaked open the small square door as I aimed the light into the ever so small attic. What I saw was horrifying. There were food wrappers and empty water bottles scattered around the floor. The room smelled of urine and feces as I quickly felt sick, slamming the door shut. I immediately began to cry. There had been someone staying in that room. But where were they now? Sudden realization hit as I felt the clothes in the closet shift. An eruption of hysterical giggles emerged from behind me. As I slowly turned around, a naked woman lunged at me, holding a long piece of wood, broken and sharp. She lunged at me, slashing in front of her with the piece of wood. I screamed in horror as she landed on top of me. I quickly felt for anything I could hit her with, until I found one of my sister's heels lying on the floor. Bashing it into her skull, I managed to knock her off of me. I sprinted down the hallway as she began laughing loudly. She did not seem to be angry or afraid that she had been found. She did not even seem to notice the blood flowing from her head. I kept running and didn't look back until I was outside. No one followed me out. I cried to my neighbors that lived across the street, and they called the cops. When the police arrived, they quickly went into my house and we heard a loud commotion. When the police exited the house, they explained that a middle-aged woman had been waiting in the living room and charged at them with something in her hand, to which they shot her down. After talking to them and making sure the woman was dead, I begged them to go back in the house and investigate the closet and attic, in fear that she had not been alone. They searched the whole house, including the attic, where they discovered carvings on the walls, some caked with blood, which seemed to be made by fingernails. They had been images and symbols. We have no idea how long she had been up there, but my guess would be that she had broken in when the previous family had moved out, since my sister had complained about the scratching noises since the night we had moved in. We then stayed with my mom's boyfriend for a few months until we found an apartment with no attic. This story was submitted by Kaylyn, but is told from the perspective of her father, Jeff. The setting is in my grandparents' house, and the situation occurred in the 1980s, so my father was about 19 or 20. My grandparents' house is very large, and it was a safe place to live. It was located in a very remote and quiet town in upstate New York, by Elbridge. Most people wouldn't think of going down my grandparents' street just because of how sketchy it looked. At the time, my grandparents were out of town, along with my dad's 5 brothers. My dad was one of those teenagers who did what they wanted to do and was the rebellious type. My father had snuck my mom into the house and planned on doing what normal hormonal teenagers would do. I'm not getting into detail. After about 30 minutes of them relaxing, my mom heard voices that she thought was coming from outside. My father, thinking it was just deer that were doing their mating call, just ignored it. After about 10 minutes of them talking, my mother complained to my dad about the voices again. My dad was getting annoyed that she didn't understand that there were no voices, so he put on his pants, ran outside, and yelled, "If anyone is out there, they better get the fuck away from this house, or else I'll be calling the fucking police." After about 3 minutes of silence, my dad heard a dried twig snap, and someone shushing someone else. He quickly ran into the house and locked the door behind him. He calmly walked up the stairs and told my mother that it was nothing. My mom was still very nervous about being in the house, so she said that she wanted to go home. After my dad had convinced my mom to stay, they heard a knock at the door. My mother and my father's faces went pale. My dad ran into the kitchen and grabbed a steak knife and slowly walked to the front door, putting his ear up to it. He heard what sounded like 2 men, at least in their late 40s or early 50s, mumble, "Hello? Our car is, broken. Can we use your phone to call our wives to let them know where we are?" My dad yelled, "No! Our phones are out!" He swore he could just hear the grind on their faces. Then he heard one of the set of feet walk off into the distance, and he heard the other man say, "Oh, do you have any car fuel?" My father was definitely sure that something wasn't right. Just as he was thinking that, he heard my mother's blood-curdling screams from the back hallway. He ran as fast as he could to her, just for him to see an old man with a pistol in his hand, ready to shoot my teenage mother. My father's adrenaline kicked in and he tackled the man to the ground and stabbed him in the arm. My father handed the gun to my mother and told her to call the police. After a half hour of waiting for the police, they finally came and arrested one of the men. The man was wanted for killing his girlfriend. My father learned how to shoot a gun after that, and has had his gun at all times since. This story was submitted by an anonymous viewer. One summer night, a while back, I decided to take a sort of vacation and drive to my hometown. I won't bore you with the details. The trip was rather lengthy, but smooth. The family was doing just fine, all that jazz. It was when I was heading back home that this happened. I've never liked to spend money where I could save it. Why buy a hotel when I could just sleep in my car? Yeah, I'm that kind of person. The second night of my drive, I parked my car in a small lot nearby a 24/7 gas station. Seems safe enough, right? I curled up in my back seat with my packed pillows and blankets and started to drift off. Now, I've always had a touch of paranoia and would often do things that other people might not. I couldn't sleep, and I wondered what was keeping me up. I sat up and checked everything. I'm so damn glad I did. One of my front doors was still unlocked. I sighed and swore a bit at my own stupidity and locked the door, making sure to double-check each door, and then, satisfied I was safe, my mind finally let me drift off. I woke up again at a random hour of the night, maybe early morning, It should be noted, I have a very dark skin tone, and that my blankets and pillows are varying dark to darker shades of blue and green. I simply wrote off my amiss feelings that I'd just happened to wake up to maybe pee or something, until I looked up. The goddamn window above my head wasn't empty. There was someone staring in, like they were trying to see if anyone was in the car. Now, I've never been the toughest guy, but I can tell you, I might have wet myself. Thanks to a streetlight, I could make out only some of his features. He was ugly and dirty, leaving smudges and clouds of breath on the window. Despite my blood feeling like ice, I moved as slowly as possible towards my cell phone. It was a simple calling and texting phone. I didn't much care for apps or anything. Then, he moved, as if he'd noticed me. Out of reflex, my arm jolted back into place near my side, and I screwed my eyes shut. I fell asleep at some point, probably due to exhaustion, but I'm still not sure how. I woke up in the later hours of the morning, and the sun was already in the sky. The man from last night was gone, but the dirty, bloody fingerprints and smudges he left weren't. I hopped into my driver's seat and booked it home after that. I ended up pulling an all-nighter as to get home faster. After a while, I wasn't as shaken up, but it still frightens me to this day. I now take someone with me and book hotel rooms whenever I travel. I'll never be able to forget the look on that man's face. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. If you would like a chance to have your story featured, make sure to look in the description for all the information on how to submit them. So that first story was pretty intense. It's actually something you hear about quite frequently now. People stowing away in someone's house while it's abandoned, and then the people moving in new, not knowing someone's there for a while. It's very unfortunate the police didn't find her the first time, but at least you were smart enough to stay on the case and eventually found this crazy lady and weren't killed by her. Thankfully, you were able to get out of there on time. Unfortunately, the police shot her when she probably just had a mental illness. I think a taser might have been more in order, but I also wasn't right there in the spot. So who knows? Regardless, I'm happy you and your family are okay, and that lady's out of your lives. The second story. First off, I think it's kind of sweet that your dad and mom have been together for that long. She was 16, he was like 19. That's an awesome love story. I'm hoping they're still together, and if so, congrats to them. Big props to the father for manning up and tackling the guy and being able to disarm him. Very wise choice to learn to shoot a weapon and have one with you at all times. Especially if you live out away from the police. As it stated, the police took 30 minutes to get there. What do you think would have happened if they wouldn't have been able to disarm the guy, and they're in the middle of nowhere with a couple of creeps with guns? That's why it's always best to have your own personal protection. Whether it be a baseball bat, a gun, a nuclear missile. Wait, a nuke? No, I don't think you need a nuke. But if you had like a gun and a baseball bat, something like that, keep yourself safe. I know a lot of people are against guns, and some places it's even illegal. Just at least make sure to have something to protect yourself with, because you won't be able to call the cops if you can't fend off your attacker. So for the third story, thankfully that guy got away, and thankfully you remembered to lock your door, otherwise you might have had an unwanted visitor coming in. I can also relate to you a lot on the not wanting to spend money part. We'll put it this way, while I was working full-time at the dental lab a few years ago, I had money to pay for rent, but I had a car, and it was easy to rip the back seat out, put a yoga mat down, and sleep right in there. What, you sleep 8 hours? The rest of the time I could just swim in the lake or party, which is what I did. So I can kind of relate to you wanting to just stay in your car rather than a hotel. Very smart decision nowadays, though, to stay in a hotel rather than some sketchy 24-hour gas station. I'm glad you made it home safe, had a nice trip with your family, and now have friends go with you when you travel. Better safe than sorry. I hope you all have an awesome day, and if you would like a chance to be featured in one of these videos, make sure you read the description for all the information. I'll catch you tomorrow for another video, and just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. I hope you all have an awesome day, and if you don't, I'm gonna spank that little behind. I'll catch you tomorrow for another video.